All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday. I'm glad to see all of you online people here because there's not too many people here in person, but we'll continue on anyway, right? So let's see. So Hamad is here. Good morning, Hamad. Simran is here. Good morning, Simran. Reza's here. Good morning, Reza. Sean is here. Sorry. Good morning, Sean. Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. Awais is here. Good morning, Awais. Hassan is here. Good morning to you. And Zartaj is here. Good morning, Zartaj. Okay. So, where were we? Oh, yes. So, last week we were looking at a number of different, sorry, I'm just going to get comfortable here. We're looking at a number of different media, right? So, we looked at, sorry, squeaky chair. We looked at a number of different media. We looked at television, right? We looked at misogyny in the Big Bang Theory. We looked at predatory romance in Harrison Ford movies, but we can also find these in many kind of action-adventure movies or maybe police-type movies. We'll see this kind of interaction between women and men, right? So here, we said, of course, that Harrison Ford's characters, the lead character, he didn't really see women's anger, right? He didn't see women's rejections, and he didn't listen to them, right? He just kind of went in and took what he wanted, right? And that's not really the kind of behavior that we want to, that we want to model for people, but it is in line with some social messaging that both men and women receive about how men are supposed to be, right? Men are supposed to be dominant, right? Men are supposed to be the pursuer. Men are supposed to, be persistent and to persevere and to never give up, right? That's the messages that men hear. But again, those can be, in real life, those can be quite damaging to women. Good morning, Yo-Yo. So again, we flagged all of these aspects of the character's behavior, and we said, ultimately what they were doing was using their physical power to objectify or to intimidate or to assault women, right? And again, in doing so, they perpetuate sexism, right? They allow sexism to continue by showing sexist behavior in movies and framing it as, as okay or desirable or just the way things are, right? And so we can still enjoy these movies, but it's also important that we pay attention to what's in them and what messages we're being given, right? Particularly if we're men, I think it's important for us to pay attention to what movies are kind of asking us to do and asking us to be. Yeah. So these movies kind of try to answer the question of, what is a man? What is a real man? And the movies say, well, this is a man for you, right? These three characters. But again, some of their behavior is good and is worth imitating, but other parts of their behavior is not, right? And so on Friday, we were talking about sexism in music videos, right? And so we looked at a particular song, right? We looked at Ariana Grande's 7 Rings, and we looked at both the lyrics and the video to see what kind of social messaging we're receiving from this music, right? And from the video. And so I think what we uncovered in the lyrics was the idea that this is a song about empowerment, right? This is a song in which Ariana is singing about, how, she's independent, she's, got her own money, she can buy the kind of things that she wants. She doesn't need a man to provide her with things. And there's also a big focus on, I guess, capitalism, right? On the spending of money and the having of money and that being good and desirable, right? So we hear kind of about both of those things in the song itself. But when we go to look at the video, I think we agree that we saw something a little different, or maybe we don't agree. But there were some different elements, right? So we definitely saw the money part of it playing out, right? So ARIANA and her friends are all dressed fashionably, and they're wearing, expensive jewelry and lots of glittery diamonds and things like that. So we see the wealth show up in this video, but we also see kind of a healthy dose of sexism, not sexism, but sexiness, right? And so my question was, the sexiness in the video seems a little out of place because there's none of it in the song lyrics themselves. The song is not about, it's not about sex or sexual activity or romance or anything like that. There's no hint of that really in the lyrics, and yet the video is somewhat sexy. And so we kind of talked about that and asked the question, well, is that strange? Should we worry about that? What does it mean? And so I kind of, I tried to make the case to you, and I don't know if you believed me, and if you didn't believe me, I guess that's okay. But what I was trying to convey to you or suggest to you was that, a lot of what we see in pop music today, particularly if you kind of lean toward hip hop or rap music, you'll see a lot of things that are coming over from the porn world, right? And so particularly like strip clubs and strippers and things like that, you will see that kind of finding its way into pop music. And again, many of these videos are male artists. Many of the videos are created by men, but many of the people running record labels are men as well, right? Men have institutional power in Western society, and generally they are in charge of record labels. And so the question that came up was, if we see a female pop star, being overly sexual in a music video, let's say, or in a performance, how should we see it, right? How should we know the difference between sexual exploitation, so a record label or her agent or whatever is kind of making money off of her, selling her sexual appeal? How do we know whether it's that, good morning, or how do we know whether it is just healthy sexual expression, right? Women are sexual creatures, and so they are allowed to express their sexuality to the world. And how do we know the difference, right? How do we know when we're looking at exploitation or whether we're looking at expression, right? Do you remember what we said about that? How could we kind of describe the difference between these two things? Sexual exploitation and sexual expression.
Choice.
Okay, give me more.
Exploitation is like when someone's forced to, like female pop stars when they're forced to wear something that they don't want to.
Yeah.
But what's the other one you said?
Expression.
Expression is when they choose to, like Miley Cyrus, I guess. She's a very good example of, because she came out forward and said that she wanted to wear what she wore.
Yes. Okay, well, you're right, although I'd like to complicate the Miley Cyrus thing a little bit, but you are right? That's kind of where we landed, right? Is that, if you're engaging in sexual activity with someone, you need consent, right? Your partner has to say yes, and they have to be able to say yes, but they also have to be able to say no in a way that doesn't result in, significant negative consequences, right? So we saw in the Harrison Ford video there that, the character Rachel was cornered in Harrison Ford's character's apartment, right? And, she kissed him, but could she have said no? Not really, right? He was threatening her with violence, right? So she wasn't really free to say no, and so she said yes, but it's not really valid consent, right? And so so the question here is can female pop stars say no? Right? Are they free to be as sexy as they want to be, but also are they free to dial it down with no negative consequences? And that might depend on the situation. It might depend on the artist you're talking about, right? Some artists have more power than others, right? When Beyonce says something, everybody like bows down, right? But not everyone is Beyonce, right? So the situations are always going to be different. But again, can some of these stars actually say no, right? And again, I think if they're not free to make the choice, then you're not looking at sexual exploitation. You are looking at sexual exploitation. You're not looking at just expression. But Ben, you mentioned, so Miley Cyrus said that what was the deal with her?
I remember the crazy phase.
I do remember her crazy phase, yeah.
She did come out and say that it was her choice to do what she did, wear what she wore, and acted the way she acted.
Right. So all that was her,
Yeah.
right? Did she say why she did it?
She said, if I'm not wrong, she said she felt like herself when she did it.
She felt like herself.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Because she was very kind of, her image was very managed prior to that.
And then she did take a wrecking ball to it.
She did take a wrecking ball to it, yeah. But she was Hannah Montana, right? She was a very kind of character that was created by, her agent and her production company, and she was made to be a character, and then she kind of had to break out of that. But I don't know, I'm not really sure if that was her or not, but
It's hard to tell.
it is hard to tell. But I mean, the question is Miley free to do that, but is she also free not to do that? Right? And
I think so, but it's also because she's big enough to do what she wants. Like, hey, she's big enough to the point where she has a say in the record company. Like Sia, but she chooses not to be known like a face.
yeah, so actually she's kind of the anti-pop star in a way.
And Ariel Winter is a good example of sexual exploitation.
Okay.
Where her mother was. Do you know who Ariel is?
I do, from Modern Family, right?
Yeah. I think a few years ago, like her mother was her agent and she was exploiting Ariel because she has big breasts. So she was using that a lot. And then she eventually got emancipated from her mother and her mom.
Yeah, so there are a lot of examples that are complicated like that, right? And some of them are kind of clear exploitation, and some of them clearly aren't, and then some of them are.
Big question mark.
There's a big question mark, right? And it's really hard to know. But I would encourage you to think about that, because I think when we were talking on Friday, I think that was a useful thing. Is can this person say no with really no negative consequences? And if they can't, like if Ariana Grande, not that she's the most overtly sexual performer out there, but if Ariana says tomorrow to her agent, you know what, I'm not doing the sexy stuff anymore, I'm just going to wear nice but regular clothes, and I'm going to sing my songs and write them, and that's going to be my career, is that going to be okay, right? Is she going to be fine? Or, is her agent going to drop her? Probably wouldn't. But would her record company drop her, right? Or, yeah, what was it? Yeah, so it's worth thinking about. Yeah, that's the other thing, is that, the music is kind of changing a little bit too, or has changed already, because people like Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas can actually create music in their bedroom, right? They don't need, once upon a time, if you wanted to record music, you needed a recording studio, and the only place you got it was at a record company. So you pretty much had to get a contract and then do what they told you, right? Yeah, anyone with, you know, a MacBook can get GarageBand, or if you want to fork over for Logic, you can create your own music, right? And you know, Billy and Phineas and other performers like that have done it, right? They've created songs and albums, and again, you know, it's changed the power relationship in that industry, because now, you know, if you can sort of demonstrate that your music is in demand, then record companies will give you, you know, will bargain with you a little harder. But back in the day, they didn't have any power, right? Performers were, well, yeah, right. And you know, back in like the 1950s and 60s, it was even like popular music was totally engineered by the record company. And so they'd have like a bunch of writers working for them, and the writer would write a song, and then they'd give it to a producer, and the producer would say, okay, I'm going to choose this recording engineer and this artist is going to sing this song in this style. And it was really manufactured in that way, right?
Now they have a bit more freedom.
Yeah, now you can do like Billie Eilish, right? You can do whatever you want, right? Within your talent and skill set level, you can make whatever music you want, and if people want it, then, you know, a record company may deal with you, right? And you won't need to give away all of your kind of artistic freedom and personal power, but still, you know, there's a lot of, you know, someone like Ariana Grande, who's, you know, going on world tours and has music videos and all this stuff. I mean, all that stuff is paid for by the record label, right? So, you know, to a certain extent, she's a powerful performer. She has power, but also they're paying a lot of her bills up front, and so it's tough to do these kind of things without, you know, without somebody putting up the money for you, because, you know, world tours cost millions of dollars, right? Millions and millions of dollars, and that performers shouldn't really pay that out of their own pocket unless they're daring or stupid. Okay, so maybe enough about that, but it's an interesting question to think: is can these performers say no to this? And if they can, fantastic. Then, you know, do as you like. But if they can't say no, I think that's a problem, right? I think that's a problem, especially for women, because I think we all kind of intuitively know that men are not required to be sexual in the same way, right? Men are not required to, you know, bounce around stage wearing almost nothing and, you know, sort of do stripper moves, right? Men are not required to do that, and it's interesting, you know, it's a question to ask of why is that as well, right? And actually, maybe we will ask that.
Some men do, some people do.
Yeah,
I
but
feel like men have more choice.
well, let's talk about that, right? Because male sexuality and female sexuality is sort of presented differently, right? And so, yeah, like, you know, we're very used to female pop performers, you know, wearing next to nothing, running around on stage in heels, you know, sliding around on the floor, and then men come out in like a tuxedo and sing a song, and then everybody's like, oh, they swoon, right? But why do men not do the same thing as women? Why is that sexuality expressed differently?
I think men have most to show, to be honest.
Well, we have basically equal skin surface area to women, right? So why are we not asked or required or encouraged to kind of put our bodies on display the way that women are? Why is that?
can't think of anything.
No, well, it's interesting, right? It's a question that is not easily answered. Would you say, good morning, Ryan, would you say that there's other kinds of, well, Basil says it's not desirable, and you're correct, Basil. It's certainly, society says that it's not, right? And so if, let's see, should we go with The Weeknd? Let's go with The Weeknd. If The Weeknd dressed up in like a tiny little sequined, short, skin exposing thing and danced around to his next song, people would have no idea what to make of it, right? People would probably laugh, people would mock him. Some people might think it's empowering and, bold of him to do that. There'd be a lot of talk, right? If Ariana Grande does it, it's no big deal. Nobody says anything. But if The Weeknd does it, it is a big deal, right? But so society is not desiring this. That is true. Certainly, men don't really need to see that, right? I don't need to see The Weeknd in, in a short dress. No, I don't need to see that. Sorry, if you're watching The Weeknd, but you're a handsome fellow, but.
Imagine he is. Like he just goes ham in the comments.
He just happened to click on it somehow, and he's like, "Why are these guys talking about me in social justice?"
That's a dislike right there.
What's that?
That's your first dislike right there.
Yeah. Well, and Hamad says, you know what? If The Weeknd disliked my my live stream, I'd be okay with that. Actually, be like, yeah. Hamad here says the majority of men are straight, so they don't want to see a dude acting that way.
Oh yeah, that's true. You should have seen the reaction of some people when I got my nail painted.
Sure, 100%, right? Well, and that's a perfect example, right? Is that, again, we'd be violating gender norms, right? Men aren't supposed to be sexy that way, right? Men are supposed to be sexy, right? But there are certain ways in which men can be sexy, and there's certain ways in which they can't.
Yeah, sexy
In a manly way, right? So The Weeknd trying to be sexy in a girly way, it just doesn't work, right? Same thing with the nail polish, right? The nail polish is a kind of light, breaking of gender norms, right? Yeah, it's kind of been done before, so people, and it's a pretty minor thing, so it's not going to elicit a lot of.
But you should have seen the reactions like.
From where?
From last week.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, but that's perfect, right? That's the violation of a gender norm, and people want you to follow the rules, and they're like, hey, what's up with that? Why don't you not paint them, right? Because that's what society says is normal. That's what you should do, right? Yeah. So Hamad's got a good point here, right? The majority of the men don't want to see The Weeknd prance around in a short dress. 100%. Sorry, Weeknd, but we don't want to see that. But keep in mind that 50% of the people out there are women, right? So do women want to see The Weeknd in a short skirt? They might. I don't know. We've got a few women here. Jessie, is that something that you would like to see? The Weeknd?
I'm fine with that.
You're fine without?
Yeah.
You're good? Okay.
I saw Japanese girl like to wear a short skirt.
Okay. Maybe.
Maybe subculture wear it, subculture not wear it.
True. So there's definitely, that's true. A lot of what we're talking about in class here is kind of Western culture, because it's hard for me to talk about the sort of intricacies of every other culture in the world. So you're very true, right? The fashion is certainly different from culture to culture, and certainly the what is sexy and what isn't varies from culture to culture. Also, what's allowable in terms of sexual expression, right? Some cultures are very kind of restricted in terms of sexuality belongs in the bedroom and that's it, right? Like you shouldn't see any sort of sexiness out in the world, right? Other cultures are much more okay with it, right? So yeah, there's going to be differences in fashion. There's going to be differences in What kind of things are, obscene, or what kind of things are allowed and what kind of things aren't allowed. And there's going to be differences in terms of what is actually desirable in the first place, right? What makes someone sexy, right? And I think most of us could probably agree the weekend in a short skirt is probably not desirable, right? And even for women, right? Even women will say, no, that's not. Jesse, I think you're, probably in the majority when you say, no, we're good. We don't, good morning. We're good. We don't need to see that, right? But maybe what I'll ask you is, why is there that kind of double standard in terms of sexual expression or sexual behavior for men and women? And can you think about other ways in which there's a double standard for men and women?
Because of the social norm.
Okay. Well, yes, but why are those different in the first place? Especially because we said that most of those social norms are made up, right? They're arbitrary. So why did we make up different social norms? But pause on that for a second. What are some other ways in which men and women's sexual behavior or expression is different, like from gender to gender? Are men allowed to do some things that women aren't allowed to do, or vice versa?
Yeah.
Like what?
Men aren't supposed to paint their nails.
Men are not supposed to paint their nails, okay.
Or wear certain clothes.
Sure. But what about an attitude toward sexuality? We said that men are supposed to be the chaser, right? The pursuer. What else? Are men and women expected to sort of engage in sexual activity in the same kind of amount? Or is one gender supposed to be more sexual than the other? Men more? How do we see that, like in movies or films or things like that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so it would be fair to say that men are maybe encouraged to either have lots of sex or have lots of sexual partners?
I would say that's encouraged, like through movies, and it's like, and when a guy has a lot of sexual partners, he's complimented, he's looked up to.
Right.
But when a woman does, then they call it slut or.
Right. Good morning. That's interesting, right? So here we have a pretty clear difference or a double standard, right? So when men have, multiple sexual partners, what do they get? Well, they get high fives, right? From their buddies and from society itself. What kind of names do we have for guys who are really successful with women? What do we call them? Playboy. What else? Stud. Nobody uses stud anymore. Do they?
Yeah.
Do
I
they? You do? Okay. All right. What else? Playboy, stud. If you want to go back decades, Casanova. Nobody uses that anymore, though. Basil says players. Right? So we could probably think of a few more, but do those nicknames or terms, do they all have like positive associations or negative ones? Pretty much positive, yeah. When you're calling someone a stud, it's kind of a compliment, right?
Yeah.
When you're calling someone a playa, that's a compliment, right? You're saying something good about them. But you mentioned that women who behave in the same manner, who have multiple sexual partners, we call them, yeah, all names that are really negative and mean, right? But that's interesting, isn't it? Why do we have this double standard? Why do we have a situation in which, men are encouraged to do this behavior, and yet women are, if they engage in the same thing, they're shamed, right? They're shamed. Why the difference, do you think?
Women are still more like they're supposed to be reserved.
Right. Yeah. Women are expected to be reserved, right? Men are expected to be a little more rowdy. If boys will be boys, right? That kind of idea. Why else do you think? Why is there this double standard? Because there definitely is. And I would suggest it exists in almost most societies. Would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder why. Any ideas?
That's why.
Okay, well let me show you something that may help, okay? So we said this a little bit earlier, regarding Poom's comment, that yes, every culture is going to have different ideas about sexuality and about gender, right? So how people express their sexuality, what are the differences between the two genders in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed, what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, ideas about marriage, and all that stuff is kind of are parts of culture, right? And they're quite deeply held, right? And so, again, painting your nails is kind of a light gender role violation, right? And most people won't have a huge reaction to it. But once you get down in terms of, the sort of hardcore differences between men and women, ideas of sexuality, particularly when you get involved with things like marriage and when you get parents mixed in there, you have some very strong ideas about what young men and women should and should not do, right? And so people will have a stronger reaction sometimes to violating those rules. I just noticed there's a little polar bear on the top of the iceberg. I'm always looking at the text, and I'm like, oh, there's a polar bear. I think most of us are familiar with a sort of socialization, or in our socialization, a pattern where men are kind of more encouraged to be promiscuous, right? They're encouraged to have multiple sexual encounters. They're expected to be good with the ladies, kind of thing. That's usually rewarded, right? Whereas women are expected to be the exact opposite, right? They're supposed to be submissive, but also, they somehow have to. There's a value of sort of purity, right? And somehow, engaging in sexual activity somehow makes a woman less pure somehow. But it doesn't work the same for men, right? Men seemingly have their purity does not go up and down in any way, right? But women, this is important, right? And so, again, the question is, why is this, right? Why do we have this double standard? So, and would you agree with me on this as well, is that when men break cultural rules around sex or sexual behavior, would you say that they often are more lightly punished than women who may break sort of gender roles or societal sexual rules, sorry? Would you say that men are punished more lightly? Yeah, you would?
But it's also highly dependent on what they do.
It's dependent on?
The rules they do.
It's definitely dependent on the rule, right? And it's definitely dependent on the culture, right? Again, some cultures are very strict.
Generally, I would say that's fair.
In general, that's true? Okay, good. Okay, here's what I'd like to show you that will maybe it'll answer some of these questions anyway. Because again, one of the points I was making in this class is that we have a lot of social rules, we have a lot of ideas mixed into our socialization. Most of them are, again, arbitrary. We've just decided that that's the way it is, and because we teach everyone to agree, then everyone agrees for the most part, and it feels real, right? But here we're going to talk a little bit more about biology, right? About kind of what kind of animals we are, because unlike, double dipping the chip, sexual behavior is something that's wired into you, right? It's a biological function, right? That's one of the things that humans are wired to do. We're not wired to do very much, but one of the things we have wired into us is a sex drive, right? That's how our species reproduces. And so we probably should have a little bit of a look at the biology just to see what's going on, right? So here's what we'll do. I have a short talk for you from this guy, Christopher Ryan. Christopher Ryan is a psychologist. He wrote a book called Sex at Dawn. He and his wife's name is Casilda. He'll mention her in the talk. Him and his wife wrote this book, Sex at Dawn. And so here he's talking about a theory of human sexuality, right? So humans have a sex drive, right? It's wired into us, it's biological. And Christopher Ryan's question is, well, what is it for, right? Why have humans evolved the kind of sexuality that we have, right? Has anyone ever watched like a nature special and seen like two animals having sex, like lions or whatever? It's pretty much a non-event, right? They get together and boom, 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 and then they're done, right? And they walk away. There's no cuddling afterwards, right? It's pretty brief, right? And it seems like, okay, well, no big deal. But for humans, sex is a big deal, right? It's a huge deal. That's why it sells so well, right? Because it's a big deal to us. And so Christopher Ryan's asking that question. Why has our sexuality evolved the way that it has? Why is sex such a big deal for humans when for other animals it's just, boom, 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 and they're done, right? Why is that? So he's going to talk about a few things here in his little TED Talk, and there's three things I want you to pay attention to here. Number one, of course, what's Christopher Ryan's argument? Okay, what's his conclusion? What's the thing he wants us to believe? And what are the premises he uses to support it? Okay. Second question I want you to pay attention to here is what does he mean when he says men believe they have some right to monitor and control women's sexuality? Okay. And it's going to be tricky because he's just going to sort of say it in passing and he's not going to explain it. So I'm going to ask you to sort of present some ideas about what you think that means, okay? And the same thing about this third question here. He'll say that women's sexuality became conflated with property rights. Again, he's just going to say it in passing. He's not going to explain it. So we'll have to try to come up with some ideas at the end, okay? Conflated, of course, means, combined or mixed together or made into one thing, okay? Cool? Okay. So online people, the questions and the link is in Microsoft Teams, of course. So we'll watch the video and then we'll come back here and talk about what we've seen, okay, based on these questions. So go watch the video, we'll do the same, and we'll see you in just a few minutes, okay? All right. Well, I'm going to put this on the screen for you. All right. So, Christopher Ryan, right? What's he talking about here? What's his argument? What's the conclusion of his argument?
A high sex drive is very normal.
Okay, so he's talking a little bit about people's sexual behavior, and that, okay, a high sex drive is normal. There's more than that, but that's a piece of the puzzle for sure. What else? He's got a lot in there. I think he packed his entire book into 10 minutes. So.
Yeah. And also how modern society has changed the way we look at sexual behavior.
Okay, and how do we look at sexual behavior? Well, in this talk, he's talking a lot about monogamy, and what is that?
Staying loyal, I guess.
Yeah, the idea that you have one
One partner, right?
one sexual partner and that's it, right? And so, at the very least, we are encouraged to have one sexual partner at a time, but there's lots of societies in which you only get one period, right? There's lots of societies where you're not supposed to have sex before marriage, right? And then once you are married, you only have sex with that one person. So monogamy is, mono is one, right? And so you're only allowed to have, oh wow, you're only allowed to have sex with one person, right? But Christopher Ryan's saying, is that really biologically who we are?
No.
No? What's he saying then?
Reference what supposedly from,
Yep.
and I guess how much I say that.
Yeah, so he's comparing us to other apes, right? He says, of course, that we're not evolved from apes, we are apes, right? Sorry, you're all apes.
Just reference the ones that we're closest to.
Yeah, right. So he says we're closest to the chimpanzee, and the bonobo. Do you know what a bonobo is? It looks exactly like a chimpanzee. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference, or at least I can't. So we're closest to chimpanzees and bonobos, right? Closer than the Indian elephant is to the African elephant. So we're very similar to these creatures, and he compares us to them in terms of what their sexual behavior is, right? Let me just see here. Oh, good. Okay, perfect. Yeah, he shows us this, right? So he has this neat little graphic that's helpful in summarizing a lot of information. And what do we see here? Well, the first thing he was talking about was female copulatory vocalization. Do the female animals make noise when they have sex, right? And here we see that humans and bonobos and chimps do, and the others don't, right? We're also looking at the number of times that these animals have sex per birth, right? And we can see that humans and bonobos and chimps are all having quite a bit of sexual activity per birth, right? But if you look at the gorillas and the orangutans, far, far less, right? They're kind of doing it only a couple of times, and then that's it, right? So it almost looks like there's kind of two things going on here, right? There's some apes that are kind of using their sexual activity just for making babies, right? And that's, I think, the gorillas and the orangs and the gibbons, right? But then there's these other primates who are kind of doing it all the time, right? It seems, or they just, are very, oh man, sorry, I guess I should just turn that off. I don't know why that wasn't off. Yeah, there's these other types of apes, and again, we seem to fit into the chimp and the bonobo category, right? Not to the other category. So, what else is he saying here? Because I said at the beginning, remember, is that the question he's asking is, what is the purpose of our sexuality, right? So if we've evolved a certain type of sexuality or sexual behavior, why do we do it that way? What is the purpose of it? Over there, with the gorillas and the orangs and the gibbons, it looks like it's just to make babies, right? It's just for reproduction. But the primates on the left side here, it seems to be something else, right? So what is our sexuality for? Yes, reproduction, because that's how there's more of us, but what does he say that it is? Uh-huh. He had a slide on it, actually. I'll tell you what, do you want to take a little break and then we'll come back and put it together? I feel like everybody needs a bit of a break. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll piece together Christopher Ryan's argument and talk a little more, okay? All right, and we are back. So, trying to figure out what Christopher Ryan's argument here is, right? So, he starts off talking about apes, and he says that, you know, in terms of our sexual behavior, we're a lot more similar to chimps and bonobos than some other apes, right? And so, we seem to be creatures that don't just use sexuality to reproduce, we use sexuality for something else. And what is that, according to Christopher Ryan?
Interaction, I think, is what he said. Another word.
Yeah, you're in the ballpark there, yeah.
Engagement.
Okay.
To get to know them.
To get to know them.
That's what you meant. I can't remember the exact word he used, but I think that's what he meant.
He did.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah, he did say that, right? So he said that, that humans use sexuality as a means to create and maintain social relationships, right? For us, only second is our sexuality for reproduction, right? Those apes that use sex just for reproduction, you can see they're not really having a lot of it, right? They kind of just do, you know, just enough to get the job done, and then they're not interested anymore. But these apes over here, they use sexual behavior for something else, right? And again, for chimps and for bonobos and for humans, sexuality is a social thing, right? It's not just about making babies, right? There's more going on there. And so here, I think, you know, in terms of an argument, Christopher Ryan is saying that yeah, we use our sexual behavior to create and maintain social relationships, right? And I think what kind of ideas support that? So certainly this graphic is sort of a summary of some of his premises, right? So he's saying, yes, we are more similar to apes that use sexuality for social purposes. This female copulatory vocalization thing is similar. The amount of sex that these primates have is very similar. Even their external testicles, right? And so this is kind of what you see going on here, right? So we can see external testicles are part of it too. So we have some biological things, but there's some anthropological things going on as well, right? Why does he say that our sexuality is first a means of creating and maintaining social relationships? What else does he talk about anthropologically? In an anthropological way. No, he talks about evidence from the world of anthropology, is what he means, or what I mean. He was talking about, he showed a slide of those two women who belong to the Mosuo culture from southwest China. What did he say about them?
It's common for them to have sex with each other.
Not quite.
You get to have sex with all the men and then get the baby, have all the smart that's the Amazon.
Oh yeah, that was the Amazon thing. Yeah, but that's okay. We'll come to the Amazon thing in a minute. But the Mosuo culture in southwest China, he said their people are sexually autonomous, right? Which means that here we kind of attach sex to marriage, right? And so that's your sexual partner is your marriage partner. And in many cultures that's it, right? Because we're monogamous. But the Mosuo, their family units are comprised of it's from their mother's line. And so in the Mosuo kind of you work on your mother's farm, right? And you live in her house sometimes. And if you're a man, the children that you raise are actually your sister's children. That's kind of how the family is divided up, right? So we often create our families around, a married couple and then their kids, but they create their families in terms of the uh,
Within the family.
within the family, right? And so a man is not raising his biological children, he's raising his sister's children. His children are raised by the family of her mother. Yeah, so they kind of divide up their families differently than we do. Doesn't much matter, but as a result, again, people are sexually autonomous, right? They can have sex with whoever they want, right? Their marriages don't have a kind of a sexual prohibition, I guess. So, you can be married to someone, and yes, you can have sex with them, but you can also have sex with other people if you want. And there's no there's no shame, there's no judgment, it's not a big deal, nobody cares, it's fine, right? Because again, they're socialized differently, right? They're enculturated differently. They don't think that's a big deal, right? But whereas we are socialized to think, yeah, it's a big deal, right? If your husband or wife sleeps with someone else, that's huge, right? That can end a marriage. But with the Mosuo, they don't think of it that way. Sex is not a component of the marriage, and so yeah, it's fine, right? It's good. So he uses that anthropological knowledge. What does he also say about hunter-gatherers or foragers? Remember what he said? Usually I talk about this in my anthropology class, and I've front-loaded, a good few weeks of anthropological theory, so you're missing that. What he says, and this is true, is that human beings are, well, Homo sapiens, like we are probably about 300,000 years old. Okay, that's how long we've been around, give or take. But for almost all of our history, we were foragers. So we hunted, we gathered, we really kept no animals, so we didn't have any domestic animals. We didn't grow our own food. We simply, collected from the natural environment. But then about 10 or 12,000 years ago, people start to farm, right? They start to grow their own crops. And he's saying, or he mentions here in his talk, that our understanding of our sort of monogamous society and our sort of restrictive attitudes of sexuality they actually come from the world of agriculture. They don't come from the world of hunter-gatherers, because if you look at hunter-gatherers, they share everything. And in fact, they almost don't have a they almost don't have a concept of personal property. So if I'm a hunter-gatherer and I'm drinking out of this, it's not really mine, right? It's just a thing. And if you want to borrow it, I basically have to give it to you, because you just don't really own things as a hunter-gatherer. And so they share their tools, they share their food, they work together as a group, right? Everything gets shared. And so Christopher Ryan here is simply saying, well, that should probably apply to sexuality as well, right? If you can't own anything else, then people probably wouldn't own spouses either. And he says, yeah, in the Amazon, like Kang mentioned, they don't have that either, because they have the idea of partible paternity. Multiple men can be the father of a child, right? And of course we all know that, or at least I hope we know, that's not how it works, right? You only get one. But for them, they believe that is the case, right? And so again, a woman who has sex with the smart guy and the funny guy and the strong guy, it's not really that big of a deal, right? She's trying to get all of those kind of characteristics into her child, right? And again, it's not biologically correct, but it's true for them, right? They believe that that's the way it works. And so he says that, yeah, we are, genetically speaking, we are promiscuous creatures, right? We are creatures who are comfortable having sex with multiple partners, maybe not at the same time, but throughout our lives, right? We're not pair bonding animals, right? Pair bonding animals, they bond with one other animal, and that's it. They stay with them for life, right? Those geese that you see flying around, the Canada geese, they're pair bonders. They They stay together for life, right? I think the crows do too. You'll always see crows in twos, and I think crows bond that way as well. But Christopher Ryan's saying that humans don't do that, right? Or at least if they do it by choice, not by biology, right? But that's kind of what he's saying, is that we've, as a species, we've kind of chosen monogamy, but that's not really who we are, right? That's not the way we're wired. And Basil says here, wolves too, I guess, pair bonders. So Christopher Ryan here is using a combination of kind of biological data, right? Data gathered from the world of biology and primates, but also anthropological data, right? Things that we know about cultures today and about hunter-gatherers of the past, right? And so he's saying that indeed we're just not naturally monogamous creatures, but of course we can choose to be, right? And especially if we are socialized to believe that, right? And if everyone believes that, it can be easier. But then, like he says, some people struggle because they think that, they should only be attracted to one person, and then they find out that they're not. And there's, shame and guilt associated with that. Hamad here says, yeah, what's personal opinion of polygamy? What's polygamy? Somebody Google it for me.
Practice or custom of having more than one wife or husband at the same time.
Whoa. The practice or custom of having more than one wife or husband at the same time. Well, what's your opinion of that?
I'd say after that argument, I think we're wired too.
Well, yeah. If you believe Christopher Ryan's argument, then there's nothing unnatural about that, right? To have multiple sexual partners, right? And so in most cultures that have polygamous marriage, most of them have more than one wife. Okay, so you have one husband and multiple wives. There are a very few, and I mean like almost none, where there is more than one husband. Does happen.
Double standard is normal.
Well, yeah, it does. Again, those things don't happen equally. It's almost always more than one wife. Yeah, what do you think of polygamy?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
One.
I blame them.
You what?
Blame them?
Okay.
Yeah. Because blame man and more than blame woman that they accept to be boys, a man who has more than one.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe sexism.
Yeah, it is maybe sexism. Oftentimes what you find is, this is a whole anthropology thing, but often what you find is that when you have polygamy and you have more than one wife, you're looking at a society where men have control of resources, right? And so the only way for a woman to access resources, so food or shelter or whatever it is actually to be attached to a man, right? And so, if you, as a young girl, your father looks out for you and protects you and feeds you and all that stuff. But then when you grow up, the woman needs to be attached to a man because she needs a man in order to access society's resources. And again, if you have more women than men, right? Maybe men are getting killed in battle or something like that, then you wind up having to attach more women to one man simply because that's the only way they can access resources, right? They're either not allowed to sort of work independently, or they're not allowed to own property, or they just don't have the same rights as men. So often you see polygamy attached to a society where, in order to access what you need to live, only men can access those things. And so women have to kind of attach themselves to a man to do that. And that's an oversimplification of what's going on. Like there's a lot of, one of the things that, did we talk about this with, I'm not sure if we talked about this, but what you find in culture is that everything is connected to everything else, right? And so if you look at polygamy, yes, a culture has polygamy, but it's connected to all sorts of other things in culture. And so it will kind of make sense within that cultural system, and it will operate, you know, to the benefit of some, or to the benefit of society anyway. But it's hard to just explain in one thing. I personally wouldn't. I personally wouldn't choose to be part of a polygamous marriage, but
Yeah,
again,
too
I've,
much.
well, yeah, but I've also been socialized to,
I think that's wrong.
well, or even not just wrong, just like I haven't been socialized to understand it at all, right? I've been socialized to think about monogamy, right? And so it's hard to wrap my head around, you know, having more than one wife, right? I think that would be weird. But of course, for people living in polygamous societies,
It's still normal.
yeah, they don't think it's that weird at all, right? Basil says if a man has multiple wives, everyone knows who the father is. Whereas if a female has multiple husbands, no one will know who the father is. Yeah, that's true too, right? So there's a there's a parentage thing happening as well, right? And that was interesting, right? Because hey guys, do you have a question, or
I got it.
you got it? Like, what were you confused about?
About the picture.
Oh, about this one here? Okay, but you're all right? You sure? Okay. Right. There's a concern for parentage, right? And so, yeah, there's both in polygamous marriages and in monogamous marriages, there's a strong concern for who the father is. Why is that? Why do people care so much who the father of a child is?
Monogamous marriages, and that's more common, I guess.
But why?
Because man is the most important to take care of the family.
Oh, okay. So, so men are, if we're living in a society where men are responsible for looking after the family, then you would want to make sure that your son is actually yours.
Yeah, I'll say that. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel kind of shitty if the kid was mine.
Well, you would, right? But you would feel kind of crappy, I'll say on to camera, if you would feel that way if the kid wasn't yours. But why do we care so much? Because in the Amazon, they don't care, right? And actually, in a lot of hunter-gatherer societies, it's just not that big a deal, because people, you know, they cooperate, they share food, but they also raise their kids as a group as well, right? Everyone helps look after all of the kids. So why would we feel crappy about it?
It's the way we've been brought up. The
Yeah?
way we've been taught.
Yes, but why have we been taught that way? What does it matter? Especially with regard to Father's Day, right? Because Father's Day here was just yesterday. So what makes someone a father? Is it the sperm that he contributes, or is it the role he plays in someone's life?
It's a role.
Yeah. But then it wouldn't matter, right?
Yeah, it really doesn't matter, but I don't know why it matters. You know what I mean?
But it does, right? Yeah, we don't know why it matters, but it does matter.
But on the other hand, I think the father have the responsibility, of course. You know what I mean? He should know that he has the responsibility of the child.
Yeah.
I mean, because of this, it's important.
Definitely, right? But let's turn it around. So if I found out tomorrow that my dad was not actually my dad, so he was genetically not my father, that would be really weird, right? But really, would it change anything?
No.
No, right? He's been there for me for 45 years almost, right? So it doesn't change anything. The fact that, you know, his genetic material is not my genetic material doesn't change anything about our life experience, right? It doesn't change who he is to me. But it would, right? It would be a big deal, right? You wouldn't expect me to just go, oh, that's interesting, right? It'd be like, what? Right? It would be a earth-shattering revelation, right? And so again, why is it such a big deal to know who the father is, or why are fathers so interested in making sure that their sons are actually biologically theirs?
For my dad, it was more of like who's going to continue the family life, who's going to take over the business, that kind of thing.
Right.
That's why like, he really wanted a son. Like, he really wanted the firstborn to be a son as well.
Yeah, so there's kind of
I think it's culture as well.
it's definitely culture, right?
Because having a son as the first kid is very important in Sicily.
Yeah. Well, in many cultures, right? Many cultures, sons are, you know, more important or more desirable than daughters, right? And Basil here, yeah, there's some sort of like legacy thing, right? There's some sort of passing down of a business or a name or some kind of legacy. Yeah, those things are seemingly important, right? Hamad's been watching Maury. Has anyone ever seen the Maury show? They frequently, I think, have shows where like the woman is pregnant and she's not sure who the father is, and so they do a test and then they determine who the father is.
I love the reactions.
Oh, it's a really trashy show, but it's fun to watch, I guess. Yeah, so there is this idea of passing down names, right, and passing down legacies, right, and last names in many cultures go through the male line, right? My last name it comes from my father, right? That was my father's last name, and his father's last name, and so on and so forth, right? Yeah.
But what would society think if, say, I were to get married to someone else and take her last name?
Right. What do you think would be the reaction to that?
Possible?
What?
Is that actually possible?
Sure. You can do that. Yeah, here in Canada, I don't think there's any rules about it. So if you want to keep your last name, if you want to take her last name, if you want to hyphenate them,
What about making a new last name?
I think you can do that. I think you can do that too.
Oh,
It's a bit of a process, but you can do it.
It's related to the children and youth her or his father's last name?
That can be decided as well. So yeah, so if you and your partner have kids, you can give them your last name or your partner's last name or both, or a new one, I think, although it would be really confusing, but because yeah, people expect it to be a certain way, right? And when it's not, it becomes it becomes confusing, right, for people. But still, you can do it. You can definitely do it. Okay, we're getting a little off track here, but that's okay because we're kind of out of time anyway. Come back tomorrow. We'll kind of tie up this sort of biological component of sexism. I think I have another thing to show you, and then by the end of this week, we might be ready to move on to racism, if we're ready to wrap this up. But that's all for today. So pack it up. I will see you tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon, or I'll see you in 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. See you.